Quillfix. Read by Quillfeather. The End of a Nightmare. A Grimdark Finale. Written by the Mare in the Moon. Read by Quillfeather. Chapter 3. Reaching Out. The freezing rain pierced the night air as Twilight and Spike trudged toward what was left of Sweetapple Acres, their last hope. "Twilight, I'm freezing," Spike complained. "Are we almost there?" "We should be," Twilight answered, desperately trying to ignore the cold. "It should be just around—" She stopped dead in her tracks, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. "It should be right here," she said, looking around at the seemingly empty landscape. "Where is everything? Where is every pony?" Spike looked as well. "Maybe they all moved away?" Spike said, scratching his head. "After all, when was the last time you actually spoke to any of them?" Twilight gasped. He was right. She hadn't spoken to any of her friends in a long time. How could she? As she stared at the dreary landscape that was once Sweetapple Acres, she couldn't help but remember how this place used to look, full of life, laughter, and happiness. But now... Twilight's eyes drifted toward a seemingly abandoned barn off in the distance. "Well, we can't stay here," she said finally. "Let's get some shelter. We can sort this out once we're dry and I can think." Spike nodded his head in agreement as they slowly walked toward the old barn. The wind howled through the limbs of the dead apple trees as Twilight approached the door to the barn. She slowly opened the door and peeked inside. It was empty, as she expected. They went inside, and Spike closed the door behind them as they looked around at their new home for the night. It was dark and empty, with only a couple bales of hay and an old wine cellar taking up the open space of the barn. Twilight's eyes stopped at the wine cellar. She remembered the day they had first put the cellar in. It had done things to Applejack. "Well," Spike spoke up, "it's not much, but it'll have to do for tonight, I guess." He began to search around the barn. "We should probably start gathering some sticks or something, so I can start a fire." Twilight simply rolled her eyes and used her magic to ignite a bale of hay and levitated toward the middle of the barn. "Or you could do that," Spike said plainly. They both sat on either side of the glowing fire, drying themselves from the storm outside. "Spike, just because I'm not the princess's pupil anymore doesn't mean I can't still do magic," Twilight said, breaking the silence. "Huh?" Spike responded, surprised. "Oh, I'm sorry, Twi, I know you can. I just get a bit worried about might happen, what with the way you are," and Twilight glared at him, slightly annoyed. "Now, Spike, Suddenly, she was interrupted by the sound of shattering glass. "What was that?" Spike asked nervously, scanning the room. "I think it came from the cellar," Twilight said, slowly moving toward the sound. "Well, don't go toward it!" Spike yelled. "Oh, calm down, Spike. I'm sure it's—" Suddenly, the figure of an orange pony sprang up from behind the barrels, dripping with wine and shards of glass. Twilight recognized her all too well. "Huh? What's that?" she said drunkenly, stumbling, trying to get on her hooves. She opened her eyes enough to see the two figures now standing before her, and her expression suddenly shifted from one of confusion to one of rage. "Now what the hey do y'all think you're doing?" she asked accusingly. "Trying to burn down my property, huh? Well, this'll teach ya." She grabbed a glass bottle of wine from the rack and slammed it against the nearest wall, shattering it halfway. "Get out!" she yelled, charging at Twilight, swinging the broken bottle in her direction. "Wait, Applejack, it's me, your friend!" she screamed back, running in the opposite direction. "I ain't got no friends," she replied, gaining speed. "Now stand still, you little—" She swung at Twilight, missing by less than an inch. By this time, Spike had gotten up and was now chasing Applejack, desperately trying to get her to stop. Eventually, Applejack was able to catch up to her target enough to tackle her, effectively pinning her to the ground. "Wait, AJ, it's me, Twilight Sparkle," she said, struggling to break free. "Oh, yeah?" Applejack replied menacingly, bringing up the jagged bottle to Twilight's throat. "Prove it." Twilight stopped and thought for a moment. I met you the day I was checking on the food for the Summer Sun celebration, and you introduced me to your family, and we ate and laughed, and Spike was there too, don't you remember?" "Well, if you're really Twilight, then," she thought, rubbing her chin. Then what did I get you for your birthday last year? A book, Twilight replied, beginning to sweat nervously. On what? Twilight's eyes grew wide. She couldn't remember. She had remembered getting the book from her, but she had never actually read it. It was, Applejack pressed the bottle closer against her throat. Apple Farming and the History of Apples, Volume 1, Spike interjected, still gasping for breath after chasing the drunken pony around the barn. Spike? Applejack said, rubbing her eyes, finally recognizing him as Twilight's scaly assistant. Well, if you're... then that means... She looked down at the hyperventilating pony in her hooves and screamed. Oh, Twi, it is you, she said quickly, helping her onto her hooves and embracing her tightly. I'm so sorry. Are you hurt? No, Twilight replied, relieved, just a little startled. I'm sorry, I didn't recognize you. I guess She looked down at the bottle in her hoof. Might have overdone it a little. It's okay, AJ, Twilight answered. Here, why don't you sit down with us by the fire? I'm sure I have a lot to catch up on. Once they had all settled down by the fire, Twilight wasted no time in getting to the questions she wanted answered. Applejack, what's happened here? What happened to the apple trees and the farm and... We sold it, Applejack replied, not looking up from the ground. You what? Twilight asked, surprised. Why would you do that? My, you sure have missed a lot, haven't you? Applejack replied, still refusing to lift her head. You have our old friend Pinky to blame for that, she said, anger in her eyes at the mention of their old friend's name. Once ponies started disappearing, so did the farm's money. With no ponies to sell to, we couldn't make nothing. And then Granny... AJ wiped a tear from her eye. Granny Smith passed away. I'm so sorry, Applejack. Twilight began. Don't be, Applejack replied. It's not your fault. We all knew her time was coming, but for it to happen now... Applejack paused to compose herself, and then continued. Big Mac tried to make me feel better, tried to get me to concentrate on my work, but I couldn't. I started drinking. It wasn't a good decision, but it was the only thing that kept my mind off what was going on around me. Without me, the farm lost even more money. Big Mac couldn't pick up all the slack, and eventually he left us too. He moved back to Appaloosa. Applejack tried her hardest to hold back her tears as she continued her story. So, after a couple months, we had no choice but to sell the farm to the Flim Flam brothers. It was the hardest decision I ever had to make, and I regret having made it every day, but at least they let me keep this here barn. Without it, I don't know where Apple Bloom and I would be today. Apple Bloom? Twilight said, surprised as she lay a sleeping Spike down on some hay by the fire. Where's she? I reckon she's out helping Zecora with something. That's all she seems to do nowadays, AJ replied. You aren't at all concerned? Twilight asked, a bit worried. Nah, Zecora's been nothing but a help for the last few months. She always sends Apple Bloom back with enough food for the week. And I reckon if that pink demon comes poking around looking for either of us, Zecora's our best bet at staying safe. Twilight shuddered at the mention of Pinky, or rather, Pinkamena. After all, she was the reason she was here. Applejack, I need your help, Twilight said, getting to the point. Huh? AJ replied, confused. With what? Pinky has gone out of control, Applejack, Twilight said sternly. You and I are the last living elements, and I figured that you won't stop her, don't you? Applejack interrupted. Twilight nodded her head. And I need your help. You don't want my help, she said solemnly. I mean, look at me, Twilight. Look at me! I'm a mess. If I had the courage to go against that monster, I would have done it by now, but instead I'm here, hiding like a coward. Twilight looked sternly at her friend. Applejack, you're no coward, she answered. You're the toughest pony I know, and you're not a quitter. You can do this. Maybe I could. Once, Applejack said, looking down at the bottle in her hoof. But now, Applejack, remember what you told me when I was hanging off that cliff the day we met? Twilight asked. You said to trust you, to trust that everything would be all right when I let go, and I did. Now it's your turn. She moved closer and took the bottle from Applejack's hoof. Let go, and trust me. Applejack thought for a moment. She couldn't believe that she was actually considering this. All of her thoughts seemed to contradict one another, but after a little while, she managed to choke out a single sentence. I'll do it.